Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Becoming Financially Efficient in B2B Marketing. I'm joined today by Chris Golec and Nicole Smith, both of whom will introduce themselves shortly. But before we dive in, just wanted to give a little bit of background of what today's session is going to be like and why I personally am so excited about it. In part, right, in today's business environment, I think we're all very much aware that it's more and more critical for us to be able to be more efficient, to improve our ROI, and continue to use data in order to optimize our efforts. So lots of conversations happening about this across really all of marketing and across all of the organization, really no matter where you sit. I think this is really relevant. And so we're going to kind of dive into a number of different topics today. Format of this is super, super casual. Chris and Nicole and I are really just going to be having kind of a conversation, walking through a few questions to get our wheels turning, but we want you to be involved as well. So feel free to take advantage of the chat functionality within Zoom and enter in your questions. We've got a team who are monitoring them, and we'll make sure we leave time to answer those as well. It's also going to be fairly brief, keep this to kind of 30 minutes or so. So really excited and looking forward to the conversation, and we'll get started in just a moment. I changed the slide here. So a couple of just housekeeping items. One, as I mentioned, make sure you're using the chat functionality, enter any questions that you have. We want to make sure that we get to those. Please remain on mute during the webinar. It's great to meet everyone. Glad to have you all here, but we don't want to hear from you out loud right now. And then third, on the off chance that you've literally never been to a webinar before, have no fear. We will record this. We are recording this, and we're going to send this to you afterwards. So take copious notes if you would like, but know that you can listen to this at your leisure. All right, so just wanted to introduce our panelists today. I'll kind of kick things off. As I mentioned, I'm the host of today's session, Nani Shaffer, CMO here at Channel99. Just brief around my background. I've had sort of a wandering through many different departments within marketing, and marketing operations is sort of near and dear to my heart, and why I've become really sort of obsessed with the concept of sort of measurement and performance and ROI and analytics over the years. But I've also been in product marketing and content marketing, spent a lot of time thinking about account-based marketing. And so really thrilled to be here today, joined by these two. So Chris, why don't we kind of start with you?
All right. Well, thanks for having me, Nani. Let's see. I'm originally a chemical engineer from Detroit, so that sounds incredibly boring, and it was. But I found my way into marketing back in mid 90s. Started a software company called SupplyBase that was in supply chain software, and we ended up selling it in 2000. But I was always frustrated that there were so few tools available to B2B marketers to really target the right accounts, and I founded and started Demandbase back in 2006 to really help companies target the right accounts. And the account-based marketing ABM category was born, and have always had an itch around how do we combine kind of ABM and supply chain actually to really help marketers understand what's working, what's not across all their vendors and channels, and how to be financially efficient. So I'm really excited to have this discussion.
Great. And Nicole.
Yes, thank you, Nani and Chris, for having me here. Really excited to talk to everyone about this today. I'm Nicole Smith. I'm the VP of Marketing at Tackle, and Tackle is a platform that helps software companies build and scale their cloud revenue channel through AWS, Microsoft, and Google marketplaces. And I'm just excited about this conversation and everything we're talking about here, because I've built and scaled marketing teams. This is my third time doing it. So I've been heavily involved in everything from doing the demand gen, the product marketing, the content, the ops at the beginning, and then seeing how those programs grow and evolve over time. And I really enjoy just working with the different go-to-market teams to put programs together that are really integrated to help generate revenue, and then helping the organization understand the impact of marketing investments and how we can keep improving those over time as well.
Yeah, I do think it's a topic that feels especially relevant, but is never out of style, thinking about how we can optimize. Great. So let's dive in. Apologies for the pause here. But let's dive in. Chris, I actually want to start with kind of a question for you. You spoke a little bit about this transformation, kind of moving from a world where marketers were tasked and judged based on volume, the volume of engagements that they were driving, shifting that in the conversation into kind of quality, and then now today moving into efficiency. Tell us a little bit about that, kind of the journey that's occurred there, challenges and roadblocks that you experienced along the way.
I know you're asking me this question because I'm the oldest and I was back in 2005. No, it is true. Like most technologies, even today, are designed around B2C, and there are several that are designed around B2B, but inherently B2B marketing is very inefficient. If you think about it, most of us, our TAM, our total addressable market, is really focused on thousands or tens of thousands of companies, whereas there's millions of companies out there. So you're literally trying to market to only a few percent of the available companies. So from the get-go, it's inefficient. Most technologies we have to use are generally B2C, so that makes it harder. And there's just been limited tools that allow us to bring together volume, quality, and then the dollar efficiency. So when we talk about efficiency, I look at what are we spending to attract, engage a company that's in our addressable market. And, just a lot of companies haven't been able to do that very easily. And so really excited where this is going. And it's finally an opportunity to really bring finance into the world of ABM, if you will. They think this way because they're focused on customer acquisition costs, which is account-based. But they really haven't been able to speak the same language as marketers for way too long.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really great point. And I remember sort of back in the day when we talked about account-based marketing and building your kind of core team, it was always, marketing and sales and operations and sometimes finance, right? And I think that we're really kind of no longer able to get away with leaving them on the periphery. And it's so critical for those two parts of the organization to be in alignment. So I want to move on to kind of a basic question that I'm going to field to both of you. And Nicole, maybe we start with you, but what does it mean to be financially efficient? We've talked about that as the topic of today's conversation, but let's kind of level set with everyone about what that really means.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I always think it can vary a little bit based on organization to organization sometimes, and how the company might be looking at things. Chris had a great point around that. And at Tackle, we're really focused on the magic number. And if you don't know what the SaaS magic number is, it's really the ratio of your yearly revenue growth compared to marketing spend. So helping you understand, marketing efficiency as well as revenue growth and sustainability. So, the ideal magic number is 1. If you're below that, you should be looking at, are we doing things the right way? Do we need to be reinvesting? And if you're over 1, it's probably hey, we should probably invest more in these channels, expand, some sales and marketing investment, things like that. But that's what we really focus on, is getting to that magic number at Tackle. But I've also seen it done other ways in different organizations.
Yeah. Chris, any thoughts on?
Yeah. I'll kind of build on that a little bit, like a magic number of 1. So let's say whatever you sell, you're selling for, let's say, $50,000. So that would mean your customer acquisition cost, you'd want to be $50,000 or under. And so if you're just looking at this chart, that means, $25,000 is going into marketing expense. And while that might seem like a lot, when you kind of pull out your SDRs and BDRs, you're now looking at $12,000 to $13,000 in kind of your pure program marketing expense. And while that might seem like a lot, you're only closing 1 out of 4 or 5 potentially. So now your cost per opportunity generated should be $3,000 or $4,000. And just the reality is most companies aren't measuring it. And if you can't measure it, you're not improving it. And so I still find so many companies that are still stuck back in the world of MQLs and SQLs, and they know those numbers. But when you translate it all the way into acquiring a customer, there's just a lot of stuff gets lost, and there's a lot of efficiency just in that process. So to Nicole's point, like really focusing on this like payback period and this magic number of 1, you really have to break it down into its pieces to really improve on it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what I'm hearing from both of you as well is there's just a level of visibility and sort of ability to be able to track these numbers and understand really all the components that go into what it takes to generate an opportunity and generate $1 of revenue, and how that looks as that customer grows with the company. So really critical as we look at that. One thing I've always been curious about as well, is kind of why we hear about, and Chris, maybe you have a good perspective here on why we tend to hear about things like performance marketing more in B2B rather than in B2C, but not as much in B2B yet.
Yeah, performance marketing kind of has this, reference to, you only, pay per click, so paid search would be kind of the most obvious thing. And so while it's performance marketing, frankly, it's probably one of the most inefficient channels. And I know some of you are probably saying, like, what do you mean it's inefficient? Like, I only pay for the clicks. But I have never seen, again, this is over 20 years, I have never seen a B2B company have more than 5% of their clicks come from the accounts that they can sell to. And so it is 95% inefficient. And so, if there was a world where you could just pay for clicks from companies I could sell to, that would be gold. And trust me, I've had that conversation with Google many times over, but it's not as interesting as self-driving cars. So here we are.
Tough to compete with that. No, it makes sense. And certainly I think that, like we spoke about at the beginning, the sort of reality of a finite universe makes everything completely different in the
Right.
B2B world. And there are many B2B companies who have, there are some that have quite a broad TAM, right? A broad sort of universe of accounts they can sell to, but for many, it's very specific, right? And not only is it businesses they're selling to, it's businesses in a particular sub vertical. So it's definitely a challenge there. Before we move on, I think there is sort of an elephant in the room, our favorite word, attribution, which I just kind of want to talk to both of you about. What are your thoughts on attribution? Nicole, how's your team kind of leveraging it or thinking about it, as I know it can be a bit of a thorny topic?
Yes, thorny is an understatement here, I think, sometimes with attribution and explaining it and understanding it. What I always feel like is kind of a challenge with attribution is it's a lot of times used to prove marketing and justify marketing versus like really improving the whole go-to-market system entirely. And it's not just about marketing, I think. We've pulled in things like sales and partner activities and data into that to really be able to instead have a conversation on, let's report on what trends are accelerating deals. And, understand, if being involved in this campaign or pulling in a new stakeholder or outreach at a certain time by an executive helps to drive these, deals forward. So, at the end of the day, I want to be able to look at this and say, like, an enterprise buyer in this vertical moves from the proposal to negotiation stage 5 times faster if they've read this ROI report. And our CEO has also reached out to connect with them as well. And that's not how it's being used at all these days. It's still very much of like, well, marketing influenced this much and generated this much revenue. And I just don't think it's a great model right now, honestly.
Yeah, I think it's such a good point that, well, 2 things. One, love the concept of it's not about proving, it's about improving. But the other is, how do we, instead of using it to look backwards, right, to look at today's world and understand like how we got here, how do we truly think about, okay, what does that mean for the future, right? And where should I be investing my dollars? I think we somewhere, and I'll put myself in that bucket as well, somewhere along the line kind of lost track of that, right, as being kind of the end goal. Chris, anything you want to add there in terms of attribution?
Yeah, I've always been kind of not anti-attribution, but the reality is, to Nicole's point, the models that get developed, this first touch, last touch, they're all basically wrong, right? Because they rely on very limited data. Most companies actually don't have enough data internally to make the models work, and they should be reliant on community data and benchmark data. And they absolutely should be more directional and like influence based versus kind of credit or as Nicole put it, like trying to prove, what's working or not. And so I do think that there's, a lot of opportunity coming down where I think attribution will get better, especially when you start thinking about, generative AI and the ability to look at very large data sets of your data sets and changes and what's happening, but also balance it across what's happening in the industry for companies like me. And that becomes a lot more interesting directionally, like where should I optimize my mix? And exactly what Nicole was saying, like what is the right mix and what are the secrets that move deals through the pipe faster? And that's where it gets, I think, pretty interesting and exciting for companies.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the concept of thinking about, I'm a little obsessed with AI right now, as are we all. And I love the concept of something that's just, in a way, this massive set of data that we don't yet know how to grapple with, and sort of how can we leverage AI to help us figure that out, and again, project forward. All right, so I want to kind of steer the conversation a little bit toward performance marketing. We touched on that a little bit earlier on in our conversation, but I just want to dive in and do sort of a double click on how do you define performance marketing? Because there's sort of a specific definition that's around specifically paying for essentially what you're getting, right? But then there's sort of a broader concept of performance marketing, and sort of, again, leveraging data in order to optimize performance. So I'd love to kind of get your perspective on that, Nicole.
Sure. I feel like we've been thinking about it very much as, hey, let's look at this. What are we spending money on? And then what are we getting in return for that? And how can we justify this by channel? And what does it look like? I don't know that it's always being used in the right way to like really understand the performance and adapt a strategy over time around this. And I think a lot of it comes back to there's not a great way to do this inside of one platform or place. I go pull multiple reports, one from LinkedIn, Google Ads, all of that, all of our different channels where we're paying for programs, and then try and put it back into something to understand the bigger impact and picture overall.
Yeah.
Yeah, I gotta say, like, it's got to be really frustrating for marketers when you have 12 different vendors or maybe 30 different vendors with different KPIs and measurements, and they're, everybody's trying to prove their efficacy. But for a marketer, they want like 3 ways to judge and measure all their channels and vendors in one place. They don't want 17, right? Because it's just too hard. And it's really needed in the world of consumer marketing. Adobe is kind of the source of truth for a lot of performance marketing in the consumer world. It's really missing in the B2B world, and it's desperately needed.
Yeah. I think there's also the point I would add as well is it can be tough when everyone is grading their own homework, right? And so it's no surprise that you end up with different vendors that all have different KPIs because they're picking and choosing the ones that put them in the most favorable light. And so it is, it's hard, and different channels and vendors might have slightly different goals and expectations. So it isn't necessarily going to be completely perfect across all of them, but certainly I think this fragmented landscape of measurement and execution it becomes really challenging. And so it is important to have that kind of centralized place to look at performance overall. The other thing I was just thinking about as well as we're sort of, talking about sort of cutting edge and how we change things and how we adjust, and I'm very familiar with that over the past several years, right, is that it had been nice, right? I think we all have this desire to set aside, 10 or even 20% of our budget for experimentation. That can be particularly tough right now, where we're looking for every place to kind of save every cent. Would love to kind of hear about how those conversations go, how you maintain or protect the ability to try new things in an environment where it's a little bit scary to potentially do things that are unproven. And maybe Nicole, we'll start with you again on that one.
No problem. Yeah, I definitely feel that pain of, previously having a big experimentation budget and then having to look at it this year and say, well, what do we do? Is this somewhere we can cut cost? And I still think there needs to be constant experimentation going on. And one of the ways we do that is by testing out, different parts of smaller pieces of the campaign, instead of maybe testing out a whole new campaign or a whole new channel together to preserve some of that budget. So one of the things like we're doing right now is we're looking at a vertical that we're seeing success in, but we don't know if a real targeted campaign to that vertical would be effective. So we're going to test it on one channel before working up a whole integrated ABM program around this and getting all the different other teams involved in it and see what kind of engagement and success we have with that. And I also think you can do little things like, test 2 messages and see which one resonates in an email or, on a LinkedIn ad and gets the most clicks. But I struggle with that too, of, wanting to experiment and go beyond, what we're doing now, with also really understanding that you have to be focused on this really targeted group of buyers and accounts right now. And you can't be wasting money on people that aren't buying. So how do you kind of marry those two and still get to, see if expanding to other channels might work as well?
Yeah, I think that's a really critical point to keep in mind, is that there are opportunities potentially, right, to eliminate waste, right, before we move into having to potentially worry about our experimental budget going away. And where are there places where you might know or be able to uncover or identify where you're spending on accounts they can't buy from you, and use that, right, and sort of reallocate that, because of course that's not going to bring much in. Chris, what about you?
Yeah, there is no good way to do a bake-off, right? Because there's so many different KPIs and measurements, and that would certainly make things easier. Nicole brought up something that's interesting, and that is, what is the right mix of channels if you're selling into healthcare companies versus tech or versus financial services, right? It's probably very different. And so, do you have to figure that out on your own? Or what if you had benchmark data for companies that are already successful selling into healthcare, understanding their mix? And that's a great place to start, right? Mm-hmm. Versus trying to figure it out. Because right now, I think most marketers just, they're doing what works in tech and they apply it to healthcare, and that may or may not be appropriate for what they're doing. And so I do think that there's an aspect here to streamline experimentation with just better and richer benchmark data or community-based data that's more dynamic.
Exactly. I always talk about the concept of sort of context, right? So it's one thing to get the answer to the question, but what does that mean? And I find so often when I sort of present whatever it might be, here after all this work, we figured out what our cost per opportunity is. And then immediately the question is, well, is that good? Is that bad? Is it changing? Is it better or worse than, And so I think being able to provide context through contextual benchmarking as one methodology can be really, really helpful. All right, I did promise that we would leave plenty of time for questions from the audience, but I'm going to steal one more because I would just love to hear from both of you. And Chris, maybe we start with you on this, about what trends, what technologies are you really excited about and looking forward to over the next few years?
It's a good question. I think today, just with the cloud integration, it is much easier to join financial data, pipeline data, and let's just call it digital signal together. So I think we're entering an area where we can put this all together and kind of unify and better measure. But one of the things that's exciting me that we're working on is this ability to understand what's happening off your website, right? So we all spend lots of money and effort, building ebooks and launching ad campaigns. And the reality is we put it out on the web and we hope for clicks, right? But most people don't click. They see it and they come to your site and it shows up in your dashboard as direct, which is really unknown because you don't know what they saw, what they did. So I think the ability to discover and understand, whether you call it the dark funnel or just, seeing what companies are viewing it and kind of this whole world of offsite analytics and view through, I think is incredibly important because it is the largest signal to most companies' website. but it's gone really unmeasured. And to me, it is kind of the secret to dramatic, kind of this new world of modern attribution. I think that will play a major role. So I'm super excited about that and kind of where that's going to take us.
Yeah. How about you, Nicole?
It's probably along those lines as well of what Chris talked about. I think anything that we can do to bring marketing and finance closer together and be talking about the same numbers, the same data, and working together on, what's going to lower our CAC, like how are we going to get to these efficient results that we want, is something that is really needed in this space. And I'm seeing a lot of trends moving that way as well. But if you can better benchmark your ROI channels in a way that aligns with finance, that's, I think, would just be like, for marketers, we need that so badly on the B2B side. And I think there's so many opportunities, like we touched on a little bit earlier with AI. You can already do so much with testing and getting recommendations for content. And I don't think it's long before we can really give marketers the ability to predict what's going to better happen across each channel based on some of this real, like either community benchmarks or your own data, but taking that into account. And right now, that's just kind of really hard to do. And it's really based off just like your own forecasting models that you've built rather than something that you feel like you can rely on and show to others.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's such a great point. And I get excited. I think we've got really meaty challenges that we're dealing with right now and always will, hopefully, because they're always the most interesting, but there's so much opportunity coming up. All right, so let's move in. We've got a few minutes left for Q&A. Feel free to keep asking your questions in the chat. If we don't get to them, we'll try and reach out to you individually afterwards to follow up on anything we don't get to. So do keep throwing them in, and forgive me, I'm going to be dealing with two screens here. This is the modern world we're living in as I look to your questions. All right, so one here that I like, this is a good one. So how do you balance the need for short-term results with the long-term goals of building brand awareness and customer loyalty? Good kind of question as you think about, there's sort of like short-term things that I have to get done and then long-term things that I know need eventually to happen. How do you think about the balance between those two, either or both of you?
I'll defer to you, Nicole, since you're the marketing. It's a good question.
It is a challenge. I would say that like education really helps with this. One of the things I've done a few times is going into like a leadership meeting or when you're educating different executives on this, is taking a few real life examples of deals and showing all the different touch points that happen in those deals, and all the different contacts involved at the account, and how it takes, touches from marketing, sales, and partners to do all this. And then there's still like a huge layer that we can't even see all the interactions they had, like Chris mentioned, like whether it's the dark funnel, dark social, those things that are going on. And I think that really has been eye-opening for a lot of people when that exercise is run of like, whoa, this is not just one area. And like, we do need to still keep building, brand awareness. And I think if you don't do those things, it makes generating pipeline that much harder in the long run if you shut off those spigots of, the brand awareness, the customer loyalty side as well. And yeah, it just doesn't work well from what I've seen.
Yeah, that's a really good one. A really sort of good combination of the two. It actually sort of leads me into this is a long question, so get ready. But it's slightly related, so maybe Nicole, you can take this one too. We'll get one for you too, Chris, in a second. We probably have time for one more. So channel performance can be not financially positive or efficient, but still have budget priority. Sometimes getting chalked up to awareness spend that can't or will never be measured, but the outcome is that all channels aren't financially scrutinized. Thoughts on what it takes to shift mindset? Oh, it went away. Hold on. Somehow it went into a new bucket here. Oh, thoughts on what it takes to shift mindsets within an org away from that guessing game and more towards spending on things that lead to wins and revenue. I know that was a very long one.
Yeah, I would probably just piggyback on what I said around the education part of it, because I think then if you can start to tell that story, and again, instead of just focusing on, a certain channel or campaign in an instance, like really understanding the full buyer's journey and talking through what is accelerating deals, what's leading to larger deal sizes, like that really helps for an organization as a whole, tie everything to revenue and tell that story as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, what is the secret behind deals that move into pipe or close faster? Mm-hmm. If you look at those in aggregate, what is the mix of activity that that happened, and then look at the things that move slowly, and what
Mhm.
does that mix look like? And I'll guarantee you they're very different.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
really have to have it all together in one place to be able to understand it.
Exactly. I think that's a really good point. Sort of incorporating both wins and losses, right? Or positive and negative outcomes becomes really critical. All right. I know we're at time. I'm going to ask one more question for those of you that can stick around for a couple of extra minutes. Last one here. How do you get marketing and finance to speak the same language when evaluating results and success metrics? Maybe Chris, we can kick off with you on that one.
Yeah, and I'd actually put finance in the same bucket. I mean, the reality is like marketers have lived in the world of campaigns and MQLs and SQLs, and the reality is finance and sales don't care about any of those. They just want to make sure that they have enough pipeline opportunities from companies that can buy. And so I do think the measurements around cost per opportunity and return on marketing spend or pipeline acquisition cost are going to become the new measurements in how we judge marketing and measure individual marketing teams. I do think MQLs and SQLs and those things are still important, but it's really it's very insular. And finance and sales, they really want to understand and plan around the number of pipeline opportunities that that can become customers, because that's what financial models and planning is built around. It's really hard to build models around some of these other MQL, SQL type of metrics because they change, the definitions change too rapidly, and it's hard.
Yeah, I think I sort of love the concept of pipeline as being this sort of like thing in the center of it all, right? That's where marketing and sales meet, and that's where marketing and finance meet, and sales and finance meet. It's just this, like, that's where everyone sort of arrives and shakes hands, right? And then takes on maybe more of the responsibility. MQLs and SQLs maybe have their place, right, for understanding what's going to lead to pipe. But at the end of the day, that's where things get more sort of reliable and predictable. Nicole, any final thoughts on that as well?
I'll be quick, but I would echo that. I don't even report on MQLs on a regular basis. Yes, I'm looking at that, but I'm not talking about that. And I actually own, for our go-to-market system, all top of funnel pipeline. So I'm going into meetings and talking about that weekly. And again, we're looking at pipeline. We're having a conversation about pipeline sourced and then what's turning into revenue. We're not talking about how many leads came from this team or this team. And it takes the conversation then away from, pinpointing one particular department and versus making it like, how is the go-to-market team developing this pipeline, and looking at, again, like the campaigns and activities that are effective versus you didn't do a good job on this channel, or this sales team is sucking at this week. So I think it just makes it a better conversation to look at it holistically like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you everyone for being here. Thank you so much, Chris and Nicole, for this conversation. Really enlightening and helpful for me, if nobody else. And as I mentioned, we'll be sending this recording out to any of you who would like to review it. And have a great rest of your day.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.